Welcome back to Talk Tickers Deep Dive. We try to keep things pretty lighthearted here, but today we're diving into something a bit heavier. Bristol Myers Squibb, BMY. Their Q3 2024 earnings call just dropped, and let's just say, there's some serious questions swirling around this company.
Yeah, you're not kidding. With that looming patent cliff just a couple years away, this quarter was under a microscope. Investors are looking for any indication of how BMY plans to weather the storm and what their long-term game plan looks like.
Right, this is make or break time for them. So let's get right into it. First and foremost, how did they actually perform financially this quarter?
Well, they actually raised both their full-year revenue and EPS guidance for 2024, largely based on strong year-to-date performance. Q3 revenue saw a 20% jump compared to last year, at constant currency, of course.
20%. That's a serious leap. What's fueling that kind of growth?
Their newer drugs, what they call their growth portfolio, are really starting to shine. This portfolio is now responsible for about half of their total revenue, which really signals that their shift towards these new innovative therapies is gaining traction.
It sounds like their plan is working. But let's be real for a second. A lot of their success has historically been tied to RevLimid, that blockbuster drug. Are they becoming too reliant on these newer products?
That's a great question, and it's definitely on the minds of investors. While the growth portfolio is doing exceptionally well, BMY is still pulling in a good chunk of change from their older, more established products, including RevLimid. They even specifically highlighted how this cash flow is being funneled back into research and development, paying down debt, and potential acquisitions. It's a delicate balance they're trying to strike here, maximizing current revenue while still investing in the future.
So they're not putting all their eggs in one basket, so to speak. Let's take a closer look at the growth portfolio. They highlighted Eliquis, their leading anticoagulant, during the call. What are your thoughts on that?
Eliquis saw double-digit sales growth this quarter, fueled by strong U.S. demand and continued gains in market share. It really speaks to the effectiveness of the drug and BMY's marketing muscle.
That's pretty impressive for a drug that's been on the market for a while now. What other growth drivers stood out to you?
RevLimid had a truly remarkable quarter. Sales surged a mind-blowing 81% in Q3, and this growth was powered by strong performance in both the U.S. and international markets. It's becoming a cornerstone of their hematology franchise, which is significant as they transition away from RevLimid.
81%. That's almost unheard of. What's driving that kind of performance?
RevLimid is being used to treat a whole range of blood disorders, and it's demonstrating impressive efficacy with a solid safety profile. This success, coupled with expanded indications and new market approvals, is really contributing to its explosive growth. It's a prime example of how BMY is using its R&D to tackle serious unmet needs in healthcare and diversify its revenue streams.
So they're not relying on one or two drugs to carry the weight. Seems like they're building a pretty solid base for the future. Now let's shift gears to one of the most anticipated parts of this call, the launch of Cobain-Fy.
The FDA approval of Cobain-Fy, formerly known as CAR-XT for schizophrenia, is a major milestone, not just for BMY, but for the field of mental health as a whole. We're talking about the first drug with a truly novel mechanism of action for schizophrenia in decades. It addresses a really significant unmet need.
You've definitely piqued my interest. What makes this drug so groundbreaking?
Well, Cobain-Fy is a combination of two existing drugs, xanomeline and trospium. Now, what's fascinating here is that xanomeline targets these muscarinic receptors in the brain thought to be involved in schizophrenia symptoms. But xanomeline on its own can have some pretty rough side effects. That's where trospium comes in. It blocks some of those side effects, allowing patients to reap the benefits of xanomeline without those downsides.
So it's like they've engineered a better way to treat schizophrenia.
Precisely. And that's reflected in the drug's strong label. It's shown to be effective in treating symptoms without those typical side effects you see with so many other antipsychotics. Things like weight gain and metabolic issues.
That's a huge deal.
Yeah.
What does this mean for patients in the real world, and what kind of impact can we expect to see?
This has the potential to be life-changing for people living with schizophrenia. Imagine a treatment that not only tackles their symptoms, but actually improves their quality of life by minimizing those debilitating side effects. This drug offers them a real shot at a more normal life. And that's a powerful testament to BMY's dedication to developing truly innovative therapies.
It sounds like Cobain-Fy has the potential to be a real game changer. How is BMY planning on approaching this launch? They mentioned something about a robust plan.
Oh, absolutely. They're laser-focused on securing broad access across Medicare and Medicaid, which is crucial for getting this treatment to as many patients as possible. While the initial 2024 sales will likely be driven by stocking, the real ramp-up is expected to happen in the second half of 2025, once access is more readily available.
That makes sense, laying the groundwork for a successful launch. Before we move on to the pipeline updates, let's touch on the financial outlook for the rest of 2024.
Sure, BMY is projecting a 5% revenue increase for the full year. Might seem a bit modest, but it's actually pretty impressive given the patent cliff on the horizon. A big part of this is due to those higher-than-expected RevLimid sales, now projected to hit around $5.5 billion this year. Really shows you the staying power of that drug, even with generics lurking around the corner.
Interesting. So they're acknowledging the potential hit from generics, but still projecting growth. But what about the impact on their bottom line?
Well, they did mention they expect sales of their other legacy brands to soften in Q4 due to generic competition. However, they are still committed to reaching their operating margin target of at least 37% for the full year. That's a testament to their financial discipline and focus on maintaining profitability as they navigate these choppy waters.
This is all sounding pretty promising so far. Seems like they're taking the right steps to manage the patent cliff and set themselves up for sustainable growth in the long run. Now let's dive into their pipeline and see what BMY has cooking up. They gave some updates on Milvexian, their potential new treatment for atrial fibrillation. What did you pick up on there?
Milvexian is generating a lot of buzz in the cardiology world. It's a factor idea inhibitor. The goal is to prevent strokes in patients with atrial fibrillation while also minimizing bleeding risk. Finding that sweet spot between effectiveness and safety is the holy grail of stroke prevention. And that's where Milvexian holds a lot of promise.
So they're trying to improve on existing treatments. Ambitious, but risky too. What do they say about Milvexian's progress?
Well, they've decided to boost patient enrollment in their phase 3 trial. Might sound like a setback at first glance, but it's actually because of a lower than expected stroke rate they're seeing in the trial.
It's a good problem to have. The drug might be working better than they initially thought.
You could say that. The lower event rate suggests Milvexian might be exceeding expectations in terms of stroke prevention. To keep the study statistically strong and confirm those early findings, they're expanding enrollment. This pushes the data readout to 2027, but it could lead to even stronger evidence for the drug's efficacy and safety down the line.
It sounds like they're being thorough and prioritizing solid data. This isn't just about rushing a drug to market. It's about developing a treatment that can really make a difference for patients. Now, Milvexian isn't their only pipeline contender, right? They mentioned some other promising programs as well. Anything else that caught your eye?
They highlighted their CD19 NECXT cell therapy, which is being developed for autoimmune diseases. Really fascinating approach. It involves engineering immune cells to target and destroy cells that are contributing to autoimmune disorders. They also mentioned advancements in their radiopharmaceutical and protein degradation platforms. Those are some cutting-edge approaches to drug development. And of course, there are ongoing trials exploring additional indications for Cobain-Fy, things like adjunctive schizophrenia, Alzheimer's disease psychosis, and other neuropsychiatric conditions.
Wow, that's a lot to keep track of. Clearly, they're not resting on their laurels. They're actively investing in the future and exploring all sorts of innovative avenues. But let's be realistic for a moment. Even with a strong pipeline, they're facing a major hurdle with this upcoming patent cliff. How are they planning on bridging that gap and staying competitive in the pharmaceutical industry?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something we'll dig into deeper as we continue our deep dive into BMY's earnings call. Stick with us as we unpack their strategy for navigating this crucial period and emerging as a stronger, even more innovative company. It's kind of fascinating how BMY is tackling this whole patent cliff situation. They're not shying away from it at all. It's like they're seeing it as a chance to reinvent themselves, Their strategy seems to be built on three main pillars: maximizing those existing growth drivers, nailing the Cobain-Fy launch, and pushing forward with that robust late-stage pipeline.
Sounds like a solid plan, at least on paper. But as they say, the devil's in the details. Let's unpack each of those pillars and see how they're putting them into action.
Right, let's start with maximizing those growth drivers. We talked about Eliquis and Reblozyl earlier. They're both exceeding expectations and really cementing themselves as major players in their markets. BMY is clearly focused on supporting them with strong marketing and commercial execution, making sure they're reaching as many patients as possible.
So it's not just about developing great drugs, it's about making sure those drugs get into the hands of people who need them. Speaking of getting drugs to the right people, let's talk about Cobain-Fy. They're calling it a potential game changer in schizophrenia treatment. But launching a new drug in such a competitive market, it's got to be tough. What's their strategy for ensuring its success?
They're being very strategic with the Cobain-Fy launch. First and foremost, they're prioritizing patient access, working to get it covered by Medicare and Medicaid, realizing that affordability is a key factor for a drug like this. Second, they're building awareness among doctors and healthcare professionals, educating them about Cobain-Fy's unique mechanism of action, its effectiveness, and that favorable safety profile. And third, they're putting resources into patient support programs. They know starting a new medication can be intimidating, so they're providing support to help patients navigate the process and stick with their treatment plan.
It's a very well-rounded approach, seems perfectly tailored to the challenges of launching a new drug in the mental health space. Now, let's not forget about their pipeline. What's cooking in their R&D labs that has you excited?
Oh, there are a few programs that are particularly interesting. We already discussed Milvexian and its potential to revolutionize stroke prevention in atrial fibrillation. But there's also the CD19 NEXT cell therapy for autoimmune diseases. It could be a game changer for people with conditions like lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. Plus, they're making some real strides in radiopharmaceuticals, a booming field in oncology that uses radioactive substances to target and destroy cancer cells. And of course, let's not forget about their protein degradation platform. That's a completely new approach to drug development with the potential to target diseases that were previously considered untreatable.
Wow, it sounds like they're pushing the boundaries of what's possible in drug development. These are all long-term bets, though, right? What about the near future, as they deal with the patent cliff and losing exclusivity on some of their key drugs?
They're definitely aware of the challenges ahead, but they also seem confident in their ability to weather the storm. They're projecting a 5% revenue increase for the year, driven by the continued growth of their newer drugs and those better-than-expected RevLimid sales. They're also committed to hitting that operating margin target of at least 37%, demonstrating their financial discipline even as they face these headwinds.
So they're striking a balance between investing in the future and effectively managing their current business. Not an easy feat, but it looks like they're on the right path. Something that really caught my attention was their mention of a subcutaneous formulation of Opdivo. What's the big deal there?
You picked up on that. That's a great observation. You see, Opdivo, their blockbuster immunotherapy drug, is currently given intravenously, which can be a real hassle for patients, time-consuming and inconvenient. A subcutaneous formulation would allow patients to inject the drug themselves at home, improving their quality of life and potentially expanding access to treatment.
That makes a lot of sense. It shows that BMY isn't just focused on creating new drugs, but also on improving existing ones and making them more patient-friendly. It's those little things that can make a big difference in people's lives. Taking a step back for a moment, how does all of this position BMY within the larger pharmaceutical landscape? They're facing some serious obstacles, but they also seem to be making some very smart moves. What's your overall take on their strategy and their chances of success going forward?
BMY is definitely at a crossroads right now. They're staring down the loss of exclusivity on their blockbuster drugs, but they're also embracing this opportunity to transform themselves into a more diverse and innovative company. Their strategy, like we've been discussing, centers around those three pillars: maximizing their current growth engines, launching Cobain-Fy effectively, and advancing that robust late-stage pipeline. Plus, they're showing financial discipline and a commitment to operational excellence. The next few years will be crucial for BMY. But based on everything we've seen and heard from this earnings call, they seem to have the right pieces in place to succeed.
It's a compelling story, and I'm curious to see how it all plays out. They're not just trying to mitigate risks, they're actively shaping their own future, and potentially even influencing the future of healthcare itself. But they're not alone in this, are they? What are some of the big trends and competitive forces shaping the pharmaceutical industry as a whole? And how is BMY positioning itself within this evolving landscape?
You hit the nail on the head. The pharmaceutical world is constantly changing. One of the big trends we're seeing is a shift towards personalized medicine, where treatments are tailored to each patient's individual genetic and molecular profile. This requires a deep understanding of the biology behind diseases and the development of some pretty sophisticated diagnostic tools. And BMY is investing heavily in this area. They're really focused on developing targeted therapies and companion diagnostics.
So it's about moving away from that one-size-fits-all approach to treatment. That's a pretty significant shift in how we think about healthcare. What else is driving change in the industry?
Another major trend is the rise of digital health tech. This includes everything from wearable devices that collect patient data to AI algorithms that help diagnose diseases and predict treatment outcomes. BMY is exploring a variety of digital health partnerships and initiatives, They see the potential of these technologies to improve patient care and enhance drug development.
It sounds like they're embracing innovation on multiple fronts, but they're also facing increased pressure from payers and regulators, aren't they? How are they navigating those challenges?
Absolutely. Drug pricing is a hot topic these days, and payers are demanding more and more evidence of a drug's value before they agree to cover it. Regulators are also taking a much closer look at clinical trial data and safety profiles. BMY is addressing these challenges by focusing on developing truly innovative therapies that address unmet medical needs and by generating really robust clinical data to support their value proposition.
So it's not enough to just develop a new drug. You have to prove its worth and justify its cost. Seems like a high bar to clear. But it sounds like BMY is up to the challenge. They're clearly thinking long-term and positioning themselves to thrive in this ever-changing environment. And we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, patient access. BMY is making a big effort to ensure wide access to Cobain-Fy. But there are some systemic issues with access and affordability in the U.S. healthcare system. How is BMY addressing those broader concerns?
That's a crucial point. BMY understands that healthcare access is a complex issue with many contributing factors. They're taking a multifaceted approach to tackling these challenges. They're working with policymakers and advocacy groups to push for policies that expand coverage and improve affordability. They're investing in patient assistance programs to help eligible patients get the medications they need. And they're exploring new pricing models that link the cost of treatment to its value.
Sounds like they're taking a proactive and responsible stance on a very complicated issue. But this isn't just about Cobain-Fy.
Right.
They're applying these same principles across their entire portfolio.
Exactly. BMY is committed to ensuring that all of their medicines are accessible to patients who need them. They recognize that innovative therapies are only truly valuable if they actually reach the people they're meant to help. It's a fundamental part of their mission and their values as a company.
It's refreshing to hear that perspective. It really highlights their commitment to putting patients first. Now, as we wrap up our deep dive into BMY's earnings call, I'd like to ask you a bit of a speculative question. Looking ahead, what do you see as the biggest opportunities and risks for BMY? What are the key factors that will ultimately determine their success or failure in the years to come?
That's the big question everyone's trying to answer, isn't it? Investors are wrestling with that as they assess BMY's long-term prospects. In terms of opportunities, BMY has a strong base to build on. They have a diverse portfolio of blockbuster drugs, a robust late-stage pipeline, and a proven track record of innovation. Plus, they're well-positioned to take advantage of major industry trends like personalized medicine and digital health technologies. On the flip side, the risk of the patent cliff is very real. Losing exclusivity on key drugs could have a major impact on their revenue and profits. They're also facing increasing competition from both established pharma giants and those agile biotech startups. And as we discussed, the pressure on drug pricing and regulatory scrutiny is only going to increase, adding another layer of complexity to their operating environment.
So it's a high-stakes game with a lot to gain and a lot to lose. But it sounds like they're playing it smart, making strategic investments, focusing on innovation, and putting patients at the forefront. Only time will tell how it all unfolds, but they're certainly a company worth keeping an eye on. Now, before we wrap up completely, I want to give you a chance to share any final thoughts or insights that might be valuable for our listeners. What's the one key takeaway you want them to remember from our deep dive into BMY's earnings call?
If I had to boil it down to one main point, I'd say this. BMY is at a crossroads. They're facing some major challenges, but they're also embracing this opportunity to transform themselves into a more diverse and innovative company. Their success will depend on their ability to execute their strategy, adapt to the changing healthcare landscape, and stay true to their commitment to patient centricity.
That's a great summary. It definitely gives us a lot to think about. I'm sure our listeners are as eager as I am to see how this all unfolds. Now, before we sign off, I want to remind everyone that this is just one perspective on BMY's earnings call. We encourage you to do your own research, talk to financial professionals, and come to your own conclusions. Investing in the stock market always comes with risks, and it's crucial to make informed decisions based on your own individual circumstances and risk tolerance.
Well said. It's always a good idea to gather information from different sources and consult with experts before making any investment decisions. The more informed you are, the better prepared you'll be to navigate the complexities of the market and make choices that align with your goals.
Excellent advice. So on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Bristol Myers Squibb's Q3 2024 earnings call. It's been a pleasure exploring these complex topics with you, and we hope we've provided some valuable insights for our listeners.
The pleasure was all mine. It's always a stimulating conversation with someone as engaged and insightful as you. Until next time, may your investments be profitable and your portfolios well diversified.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how they're adapting to these industry changes and kind of like forging their own path forward.
Yeah.
Not just reacting, but actively shaping their own destiny. But with all this talk about the long term, let's bring it back to the present for our listeners. What are some key things investors should be taking away from this earnings call? What stood out to you?
I'd say the first big takeaway is BMY's solid performance in their core business. That growth portfolio is really delivering exceeding expectations. And that's setting them up for a more balanced revenue stream, which is super important as they approach that RevLimid patent cliff. They're clearly working to reduce their dependence on those older products.
Yeah, that's a good sign for investors. They're not just talking about diversifying, they're actually doing it.
Yeah.
What else should we be paying attention to?
The successful launch of Cobain-Fy is another key point. It's early days, sure, but things are looking really promising. They're clearly dedicated to making this drug a success, and they're taking the right steps to get it into the hands of patients. This could be a real game changer, potentially establishing BMY as a leader in neuroscience, which is a massive market with a lot of unmet needs.
So they're not just managing the decline of their old drugs, they're building new avenues for growth. It's a two-pronged approach to this transition period. Now, what about their pipeline? We touched on it before, but what's the big takeaway for investors when it comes to their research and development?
Well, they're making some strategic investments in their late-stage pipeline, focusing on those high-potential therapies that could really drive growth in the future. And they're not just throwing money at research, they're being selective, focusing on areas where they think they can make a real difference, like Milvexian for stroke prevention, the CD19 NEXT cell therapy for autoimmune diseases, and all those advancements in radiopharmaceuticals and protein degradation, cutting-edge stuff. And BMY is positioning itself as a leader in these areas.
So they're playing the long game, but making smart moves for the future. Not afraid to invest in innovation, even with the patent cliff looming. Now, this all sounds pretty positive, but they're also operating in a really tough environment, right? Drug pricing is under a microscope, there's tons of competition, and regulations are getting stricter. How are they handling all that?
That's where the fourth key takeaway comes in. Financial discipline. They're committed to maintaining profitability and generating strong cash flow, even as they invest in future growth. They're being careful with expenses, focusing on operational efficiency, and prioritizing those high-return investments. This discipline gives them the flexibility to navigate the challenges and come out of this transition stronger than ever.
Yeah, it's a tough balancing act. They need to invest in the future without sacrificing the present. But it sounds like they've struck a good balance. They're not just surviving, they're thriving. Now, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. BMY is a company in transition, but also a company with a long history and a strong track record of innovation. What do you think the future holds for them? Can they get past this patent cliff and emerge as a leader in new areas like neuroscience?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? They've got all the right ingredients, a strong portfolio, a promising pipeline, a talented team, and a real dedication to innovation. But they've also got some serious challenges ahead, like we've talked about, I think, ultimately. Their success hinges on their ability to execute their strategy, adapt to the ever-changing healthcare landscape, and keep that focus on delivering value to patients and investors. It's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Very well said. Well, on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive into Bristol Myers Squibb's Q3 2024 earnings call. It's been a pleasure exploring these issues with you.
Likewise, it's always great to chat with someone who is as engaged and insightful as you. Until next time.